The feeling of being watched. Ava's apartment had always felt wrong. It wasn't something she could explain, not in any way that would make sense. It was a feeling, a presence, lurking just outside her perception. The brownstone was old, the floors groaned under invisible weight, and the shadows clung to the corners longer than they should. But tonight, the wrongness had deepened. She felt it in her bones as she curled on her couch, the glow of the television casting erratic flickers across the dark room. The news anchor droned on about another missing person, another woman who had vanished. Ava muted the TV. Her skin prickled, an itch at the back of her skull. Someone was watching her. She turned toward the window, her breath catching in her throat. Outside, beyond the dim glow of the street lamp, the alley was silent. Too silent. Ava's fingers tightened around the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Maybe she was being paranoid, maybe she was just tired. But then, a shadow shifted at the far end of the alley. A figure, standing, watching. Ava's chest tightened. She scrambled for her phone, hands clammy with sweat. Unknown number. The screen buzzed, vibrating against the coffee table. She swallowed hard and answered. Silence. Her own shaky breathing echoed back at her. Then a whisper, barely more than breath. We see you. Ava dropped the phone. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she stumbled to her feet, every instinct screaming at her to run. But she didn't. She went to the window. The alley was empty, but the wrongness remained. The first sign of intrusion. Ava locked every door and window, double-checking the deadbolts. She even pushed a chair against the front door, though she knew it wouldn't do much good. Calm down. Breathe. She checked her phone again. The call log showed no number, as if it had never happened. Then, a noise. A faint click. Metal against metal. Ava froze, heart hammering. It came from the back door. She moved slowly, pressing her ear against the wood. The lock was moving, twisting. Someone was picking it. Panic flared in her chest. She stepped back, eyes darting around the kitchen for anything she could use as a weapon. A knife. She grabbed the biggest one from the block, gripping it so tightly her knuckles went white. The lock gave a final snap. Ava held her breath. The door creaked open. A masked man stepped inside, his silhouette cutting through the darkness like a phantom. Broad shoulders, gloved hands, the glint of something metallic in his grip. A knife. Ava took a step back, but the man moved fast, too fast. A hand grabbed her wrist, squeezing hard enough to bruise. She barely had time to react before a second figure lunged from the darkness, knocking the knife from her grip. Pain exploded as she hit the floor. A boot pressed against her ribs, pinning her. She struggled, gasping, but the weight on her chest only pushed down harder. A third man entered, taller than the others. His mask was different, more fitted, with black eye holes like empty voids. He knelt beside her, brushing gloved fingers over her cheek. Ava recoiled, bile rising in her throat. The man chuckled. She's pretty. His voice was low, amused. You were right. She's perfect. Ava thrashed, a choked scream ripping from her throat. But the first man clamped a hand over her mouth. No one would hear her. No one was coming. This was it. Then, the lights flickered. The room grew colder, and something else stirred. The man in the mask didn't notice at first. None of them did. But Ava felt it. The wrongness in the apartment, the thing that had lingered in the walls and the floorboards and the suffocating air, was awake now, and it was hungry. Ava stopped struggling. A shift. A flicker of shadow that shouldn't have moved. The air tightened. The taller man frowned. What the? The lights went out. Total blackness. Ava could still feel the weight on her ribs, the heat of the man's breath near her face. But then, something yanked him backward. A guttural, wet gurgle filled the silence. The pressure on her chest vanished. Ava scrambled back, gasping, trying to see in the darkness. A thud. A low, ragged wheeze. The emergency light from the hallway cast a dim glow into the room, revealing Jackson, the leader, hanging in the air. His body jerked, limbs twitching, his head lolled at an unnatural angle, his spine bending too far back. His mask slipped, revealing wide, bloodshot eyes. His mouth opened in a silent scream. Then, with a sickening snap, his neck broke. The body dropped. The remaining two men staggered back, their breath coming in panicked gasps. "The fuck was that?" one of them shouted. Ava ran. Her feet pounded against the floor as she bolted toward the bedroom. She didn't look back. She didn't want to. Because whatever had killed Jackson, it wasn't done yet. Ava slammed the bedroom door shut. No lock. No way out except the window, but the fire escape was rusted and unreliable. Outside, she heard the last two attackers shouting, their voices laced with fear. What the hell is happening? Where is she? The air grew colder still. Then a new sound, a whisper. Not in her ear, in her bones. A sound that wasn't sound at all. A feeling, a knowing, something alien and ancient. The second man screamed. Ava pressed her back against the wall, clamping her hands over her ears. But she could still hear it. The wet, crunching sound of bones breaking from the inside out. A thud, silence, one left. Ava forced herself to move. She went to the window, fingers fumbling with the latch. She had to get out. Then, a noise behind her. She turned. The last man stood in the doorway. His mask was gone, revealing a sweat-slick face, eyes wild with terror. His chest heaved, his hands trembling. But his fear wasn't directed at her. It was at the thing behind her. Ava didn't want to look, but she did. And what she saw, it was her own shadow, stretched long against the wall. But it was wrong. It moved when she didn't. Its fingers twitched, lengthening into claws. It turned its head toward her, its mouth splitting open into a jagged, empty grin. Ava barely had time to scream before the shadows swallowed everything whole. Chapter 2: The Escape That Shouldn't Have Happened. The last man standing, Ryan, stood frozen in the doorway. His pulse thundered in his ears, sweat trickling down his spine. Ava was still in the room, but so was something else. The shadow on the wall, her shadow, had come alive. It stretched unnaturally, moving without her, its fingers curling into grotesque, elongated claws. The mouth, an ink-black void, was grinning at him. Ryan's breath hitched. He took a slow step backward, heart hammering against his ribs. "What the fuck?" he whispered. Ava wasn't moving. She stood still, back pressed against the window, but her eyes, they were wrong now. No longer hazel, black, hollow, bottomless, like something else was inside her. Ryan took another step back. His boots crunched against something wet. He glanced down. It was Eddie, or what was left of him. His body was twisted, contorted like a broken marionette. His limbs bent the wrong way. His mouth hung open in a silent scream, blood pooling around his ruined face. Ryan felt bile rise in his throat. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. He turned to run. Ava whispered, "You can't leave." The door slammed shut behind him. Ryan spun, yanking at the knob, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked. He didn't lock it. Hands shaking, he turned back toward Ava, but she was gone. Just gone. Only the shadow remained, and then it moved. Toward him. The escape that shouldn't have happened. Ryan didn't think. He just acted. He ripped his gun from his holster and fired. The sound was deafening in the small space, the muzzle flash illuminating the dark. The bullet slammed into the wall, through the shadow, and embedded in the plaster. Nothing. Ryan's breath came in short, ragged gasps. His hands shook. He needed to get out. His gaze darted toward the only exit. The window. Fuck it. Without hesitating, he sprinted for it. He could hear the shadow behind him, whispering in a voice that wasn't Ava's, wasn't human. He didn't stop, didn't look back. He reached the window, grabbed the rusted frame, and threw himself through it. The glass shattered around him as he plummeted into the freezing night air. Then, impact. Pain shot up his leg as he crashed onto the fire escape, metal groaning beneath his weight. He gasped, rolling onto his side, gripping the railing to keep from falling further. Above him, the window was dark. No movement, no sign of Ava. But he could still feel it. The wrongness, like something was watching him from the abyss. Ryan pushed himself up, ignoring the pain, and stumbled down the fire escape. He had to get out of here, had to get far away. He didn't know what the hell had happened in that apartment, but he wasn't sticking around to find out. The hunt begins. The alley was cold and too quiet. Ryan limped forward, gripping his bleeding arm where the glass had sliced through his jacket. His breath came in ragged gasps. He needed a plan. Think, his car. It was parked a block away. If he could make it there, he could get the hell out of this nightmare. He moved quickly, his boots splashing through puddles of dirty rainwater. Every few steps he glanced over his shoulder. The street was empty. No Ava, no shadow, no thing. But the wrongness remained. It clung to him like something unseen was breathing against his neck. Then, a noise, a whisper, right behind him. Ryan spun, raising his gun. Nothing, just a flickering street lamp, just the dark. But something was different now. The street. It had changed. The buildings seemed taller, more distorted, their edges blurring like a half-remembered nightmare. The road stretched longer than it should have. Like he wasn't in the city anymore. Like he wasn't in the real world anymore. Ryan swallowed hard. Run. He turned and sprinted. Nowhere to run. Ryan reached his car, heart pounding so hard he thought it might explode. He fumbled for his keys, hands shaking violently. His fingers slipped. The keys fell. Fuck. He dropped to his knees, scrambling for them in the darkness. Then, a soft chuckle, a woman's voice, Ava's voice. Right behind him. Ryan froze. Cold breath ghosted against the back of his neck. You thought you could escape? Ryan whirled, gun raised. Ava stood inches away, but it wasn't Ava. Her skin was pale, almost translucent under the streetlight. Her veins, black as ink, pulsed beneath the surface. Her lips curled into a slow, inhuman smile. Her eyes, bottomless voids of shadow, swallowed all light. Ryan fired. The bullet passed through her, like she wasn't real. Ava's smile widened. Ryan stumbled back. No, this isn't happening. He reached for the car door, but Ava wasn't there anymore. She was behind him. You shouldn't have come here. He spun, but it was too late. The shadows swallowed him whole. The truth revealed darkness. Ryan was falling, not through space, not through air, through something else. Something alive, something hungry. He felt it around him, slithering into his skin, crawling into his thoughts, whispering things he couldn't understand. And then, a sudden thud. He landed hard. His body screamed in pain. His vision swam. He was no longer in the alley, no longer in the city. He was back in the apartment, but it was different. The walls pulsed like breathing flesh. The floor was slick and wet, the ceiling dripping something black. And in the center of the room, Ava. Or what used to be Ava. She stood in the dark, head tilted at an unnatural angle, her fingers elongated into claws. Her mouth split open, too wide, revealing rows of jagged, shifting teeth. Ryan tried to move, tried to scream, but the darkness held him down. Ava stepped forward. You never had a chance, she whispered. Then the shadows devoured him.